Awesome. Secondly, as you all saw when you come in, you were automatically put on mute. Please stay on mute. After the lecture, there's going to be a Q&A session with Ben Henderson, who is our museum educator and grant writer. Ben, go ahead, just give a wave really quickly so everyone knows who you are here.
Hello, I'm the museum editor, as Carl said. I'm going to help Dr. Davis keep this thing organized and admit people as they come in. Feel free to ask questions in the chat as the presentation goes on. I will try my best to keep track of everyone's questions. I'll keep them in a Google Doc and just try to answer as many as possible in the time that we have available. We have quite a few people here. We still have some people coming in. So let's enjoy this presentation together with Dr. Davis and see what he has to tell us about Maroons and all that stuff. I'm particularly interested in learning about Maroons in Illinois because I did not know Maroons even existed in Illinois because I thought it was just too flat to hide anywhere. So.
Awesome. Right. Thank you, Ben. Definitely throughout the presentation, if you do have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. Also, Ben will be moderating kind of just a live Q&A session too. So at the end, if you do want to unmute yourself, that would be the appropriate time to do so. Please, any and all questions are welcomed. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to Dr. Edward Davis. For 8 years, Edward C. Davis IV directed Africana Studies for the City Colleges of Chicago, based at Malcolm X College, where he also taught anthropology and chaired social sciences. In 2014, Davis became the youngest tenured professor in the state of Illinois. Davis had taught in Kongo-Ngola, Brazil's Amazon, France, England, New York, Mississippi, and California. He has also conducted research in the Philippines, Haiti, Angola, Switzerland, Quebec, Canada, and Germany. Davis earned a BA from the Gilliton School at New York University, an MPhil in anthropology at University of Cambridge, and MA PhD degrees in African American Studies at University of California, Berkeley, with a dissertation called Beer, Blood, and the Bible, Economics, Politics, and Geolinguistics, Praxis in Kongo-Ngola. As a Chicago native, Dr. Davis remains true to his grandmother's Maroon roots from the Illinois Trail of Tears and Underground Railroad in Shawnee National Forest. Davis is a descendant of Saponi Indians and Angolans John and Margaret Goins from 1619 Virginia. Most recently, in January 2021, Professor Davis began teaching African American Studies at Southland College Prep High School in Richton Park on the historic Great Sauk Trail in Illinois. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Edward Davis.
Hello, everybody. I'd like to say thank you very much to Carlos. Thank you very much to Ben. Thank you very much to Elsie Hector Hernandez, the founding executive director of the Haitian American Museum of Chicago. If you would like to turn your cameras off, that'd be great. We're still recording. I'm really just happy and pleased to be here with everybody that's joining us. So I'd like to dedicate today's lecture to the Queen, Miss Cicely Tyson, who recently joined the realm of the ancestors at the age of 96 years young. And also I offer a personal dedication to my deceased granny, Dorothy Lee, and to my living grandma, Doris T. 2 gifts from God. So on January 19th, 2020, Yannick Marshall issued an appeal bringing the Maroon to the foreground in Black intellectual history. The article appeared in Black Perspectives, the official webpage of the African American Intellectual History Society. Marshall begins by mentioning Sylvia Ndouf's book, Slavery's Exiles, the story of the American Maroon, published in 2014 and 2016 by New York University Press. In that groundbreaking work, Sylvia Ndouf identifies autonomous settlements operated by runaway slaves among borderland Maroons who lived in proximity to white settlements versus hinterland Maroons who lived further away from plantation societies in the US South during the years of American plantation slavery. Diouf concentrates her historical research in Louisiana's Bas du Fleuve in the 1780s, as well as in Georgia and South Carolina in the Belle Isle and Bear Creek regions of the same time period. Diouf also explores Virginia's Great Dismal Swamp in the early 1700s. Yannick Marshall's article from Juneteenth quickly moves away from Diouf's historical work to offer Maroon communities as a point of reference to critique present-day crises impacting movements for Black lives. But with the urgency of Juneteenth, think June 19th, 1865 in Galveston, Texas, Marshall suggests that the pessimism of Maroonage can provide clarity for, quote, the pessimism of Maroonage can provide clarity for the future of racial justice in the settler colony as a sound analytical solution, and goes on to note, quote, more sound than predictions of patriots who deface and clip the wings of hope so violently in their stuffing it into a moribund racist experiment. Marshall concludes, quote, Maroon clairvoyance is enough to warrant that the tradition deserves a greater visibility in the story of African-American intellectual history. The dominant story of African-American history is a story about a fight to make racist society just. We rarely hear about the victories we've won in our giving up, end quote. Personally speaking, I am a Maroon via my paternal and maternal grandmothers. And as such, I must interrogate assumptions of limited literature on our extensive roots of freedom as never pessimistic, but as choosing true freedom over enslavement within racial capitalism. The ultimate problem Yannick Marshall describes is one of disciplines of Black studies and Africana studies versus African American studies and African diaspora studies or African studies. And of course, Forfield's anthropology versus history or literature in the English language only. So what is the problem? On Juneteenth, 2020, as I read Yannick Marshall's article, I'd been working safely before and during the pandemic at the Margaret Walker Center at Jackson State University, where a grant from the Andrew Mellon Foundation allowed me to develop my African American Studies textbook, while also exploring what I had been calling Maroon Epistemologies. Over the last 3 years, as I've been separating myself from my dissertation research on praxis in Democratic Republic of Congo and the Republic of Angola, I hope to reroute myself in ecological economies of the Ohio and Mississippi valleys. My grandmothers, Dorothy and Doris, descend from Muskogee Creek African Chinese, Mississippi Delta on one side, and Saponi, Virginian, Appalachian, Ohio Valley, Angolan Amerindians on the other. Back on Juneteenth 2018, I found myself working in the Mississippi Delta, traveling to Alabama's Equal Justice Initiative and Legacy Museum. I see Calvin Wilds was there. Calvin was there with us at the museum. I shouldn't mention people in the audience, sorry. But the American Civil Liberties Union asked me to write an op-ed about the museum, but about Juneteenth 2018, which they entitled, "Are Americans at Risk of Forgetting Slavery and Repeating Our Mistakes?" It was a really well-received op-ed that I wrote. But before I arrived in Mississippi, both in 2018 and in 2020, I emailed my mentor, Sylvia Diouf, the author of the great book on slavery's house, the story of the American Maroon. Sylvia Diouf had been my professor during my freshman and sophomore years at New York University. And in the spring and fall of 2001, I was just a teenager, removed from the South Side of Chicago with deep interest in becoming a diplomat in Haiti, Congo, and Angola. I was empowered by my roots, but anthropology pulled me in another direction. And by 2001, I wanted to do an archaeological dig at the Lower Manhattan African burial ground at 290 Broadway, just a few blocks from my dormitory sophomore year. But while the tragedy of September 11th shut down my neighborhood to outsiders, the area from Wall Street to Tribeca remains the site where 10,000 Africans are buried, and where I lived 10 months in a veritable terrorist site. I turned my academic concentration away from the soils below the courthouse and City Hall towards true war zones and points of global instability where my very distant Angolan, Congolese, and Haitian cousins lived across the sea as orphans and vulnerable children. I hoped my teenage existence 1 kilometer from the World Trade Center would refocus grief into action for others and the work that I did in Congo and Angola. But over 20 years now, my own anthropological approach of Black, Indigenous, and Endogenous vantage points became Geolinguistic Praxis Service, GPS, and Maroon Epistemologies, ME. Again, as a whole, we must consider the problem of assuming Maroons to be pessimistic for choosing freedom in lieu of certain lived death in whiteness as zombies in global plantation capitalism. So how do we access ancestral powers? On March 31st, 2015, I found myself near the town of Carrefour in Haiti, where I interviewed Voodoo Grand Ati, Max Gesner-Beauvoir, the chef supreme of Haitian Voodoo. And so the global supreme chef of Voodoo welcomed me into his lakou just 6 months before he would pass into the realm of the ancestors. I had a very small grant from the Center for Latin American Studies at the University of Chicago, and I was enjoying the ease of having earned tenure more than a year prior at City Colleges of Chicago, Malcolm X College, where I had been teaching African Studies, anthropology, and sharing social sciences. So the trip to Haiti in 2015 was supposed to bring about an article and conference paper on Haitian diasporic businesses investing from New York, from Montreal, from Miami, from Paris, and from Nassau, Bahamas, working on post-earthquake development. But that well-organized plan fell apart. Why did it fall apart? Why did it fall apart? Well, my friends called on Max Beauvoir to help me with this interview, with my research while I was there, but it fell apart because of my Northern Hemispheric biased hypothesis that aid from Haitians abroad would solve problems from within. And all the same, those 10 days in Haiti marked a disciplinary rites of passage and an ancestral initiation into a higher elevation for ME, for me. So when Max Beauvoir met me, he asked with certainty, "Vous êtes Haïtien? You're Haitian." I replied, "No, je ne suis pas haïtien, je suis américain, afro-américain. Je n'ai pas d'ancêtre haïtien. En fait, je suis noir américain depuis 2 ou 3 siècles. No, I'm not Haitian. I'm an American. I'm Afro-American. In fact, I don't have Haitian ancestors. I have been Black American for 2 or 3 centuries." And Beauvoir joked, he laughed, "Mais tu n'as pas de cet âge, 300 ans. But you're not that old. You're not 300 years old." After a few jokes and compliments, Beauvoir asked me to record the rest of our interview in English. Max's daughter, Rachel Beauvoir-Dominique, earned her anthropology degree at Oxford. And Rachel was also a Mambo priestess. I felt somehow that my imposter syndrome was showing through. And in this holy week of Rara, Easter, and Passover, I feared that I would be seen en plein air in the heart of Haiti as a true fraud, a true imposter in my research. Beauvoir joked with me, "Tu as fait tes études à Cambridge. You better learn French, but let's record in English." And we joked a bit. It was a very nice interview. I listened to a bit of the recording this morning, actually, for inspiration. But as I grew comfortable in that 2 hours with Max Beauvoir, recording a fascinating open-ended interview where the Beauvoir family origin story unraveled with the Sauvages sisters, meeting a Frenchman named Beauvoir before the year 1700 in the town of Port-de-Paix. We also discussed Benin, Congo, Egypt, Einsteinian quantum physics, Buddhism, Hinduism, Shintoism, Dogon cosmology, and much more. As a patented biochemist, physicist, an advisor to Haitian presidents, Beauvoir insisted that I am Haitian, having been there before. Prior to 2015, I rarely thought ancestrally. Beauvoir insisted that my ancestors led me to him to unlock my powers. I wondered, I didn't know, but I wondered about my grandfather's mother from New Orleans, likely born to descendants of free Haitian Jews arriving in Louisiana around 1817. This is the maternal lineage of my paternal grandfather, Eddie Davis Jr., for whom I'm named. The point of my trip to Haiti would result in a conference paper read in New Orleans at the Caribbean Studies Association. So Beauvoir was completely correct in his metaphysical assertion. During my trip to Haiti, my grandma Doris celebrated her 85th birthday in Chicago. Granddaddy Eddie married my Malunja Maroon grandma Doris, who still lives in Chicago at 90 years young. And her father and grandmother were Angolan Malunjan Maroon descendants of Saponi Indians and of Angolan King Kongo-Ngola. For years, I'd assumed that Grandma Doris's own grandma Strosha Newbern was a Polish Jew who happened to wander upon our Underground Railroad community in Southern Illinois and in Ohio. But in fact, Strosha's maternal grandmother was Marilla Goins, the great-granddaughter of Haiti, who was the grandson of King Kongo-Ngola. While I was in Haiti in 2015, during my grandmother's birthday, my cousin Terry Franklin posted a video in a family social media page of himself reading the last will and testament of our Florida ancestor, John Sutton, written by Lucy Sutton, his enslaved wife. And she had taken the Underground Railroad with her 8 children to the Shawnee Forest where the Goins family were waiting. Lucy Sutton and Marilla Goins were co-grandmothers to my grandmother's grandmother, Strosha Newbern. Like my Granny Dorothy and Grandma Doris are my 2 co-grandmothers. And all of that fell into my lap immediately after meeting Ati Max Beauvoir, the king of Maroons. The Maroon spirit of Marilla Goins fills Columbus, Ohio, down to the Shawnee National Forest in Southern Illinois, with her blood running deep across Canada, the Dakotas, and down to the Appalachian Carolinas. This is the Dismal Swamp. But for 10,000 years strong, and yet equally so in the Ndongo interiors of Kongo-Ngola, from Bie to Benguela, Kwambu, and Malangi City in Malangi Province, from which we would gain the title Virginian Malungians. When I grew up in the 1980s and 1990s in the south side of Chicago, I enjoyed attending family reunions away from Chicago, down to Little Egypt in Southern Illinois, where under 1,000 or so descendants of Marilla Goins gathered in the summer solstice. Little did I know we had likely been gathering on the solstice for 10 millennia here in North America, possibly. One language, one of our ancestral languages, a Siouan Algonquin variety of the Yasunichi Tutelo Saponi, is not extinct, but far less spoken than in centuries past. Thus, I accessed my indigenous foremothers' psycholinguistic consciousness through standardized medieval French and Portuguese and through various Creole languages within which multiverses of truth would come to me. So let me explain this theory and method. The English language limits access to Maroon power knowledge systems. Imagining the world outside of coloniality remains an essential component to Maroonage. In these COVIDian times, since 1619, it becomes necessary to locate ME, Maroon Epistemologies, using GPS, geolinguistic praxis, in active service. Both ME and GPS are theoretical paradigms that I created to explain my collection of multilingual geographic and historical studies that intersect natural and social sciences with humanities and STEM analysis. And so this presentation I'm giving now hopes to establish a framework for envisioning new words and new worlds beyond dissertation academic jargon or global fieldwork that some scholars and practitioners may or may not easily connect. The world finds itself in need of a theoretical paradigm within which to revision and reimagine existence. The 2017 volume, Futures of Black Radicalism, offers a collection of chapters, including one called Radical Capitalocene, written by political scientist Françoise Vergès, edited by Gay Theresa Johnson and Alex Lubin. One finds Vergès deconstructing environmental inequities brought about by the racial capitalism or the racial capitalocene. Vergès, a descendant of Vietnamese and Franco-African Réunionnais activist, and having earned herself a Berkeley PhD, merges her unique global expertise with a critique of the Anthropocene, or human presence on Earth, as inseparable from climate change and anti-Black racial capitalism. Vergès offers unifying language to deconstruct our urgent moment, circa 2017. I came across Futures in Black Radicalism after having filed my PhD, which carefully, my dissertation, excluded the words race, Black, and racism. In a thesis on African linguistic biography that invented a unified language my committee members could all comprehend in full agreement. I had linguist Sam Chombo, who is great linguist of Chichewa from Malawi. I had Laura Nader, the great anthropologist of law and anthropology of physics, and Ugo Nwokeji, historian who does history of Nigeria and of transatlantic slave trade. So I needed a language that they could all communicate with, intellectually or theoretically, along with Michel Aguerre, an anthropologist of diaspora. And so since 2001, my work centered around the moment of geological and human extraction since the fall of Ceuta in 1415, led by Prince Henrique o Navegante of Portugal, rooted in critiques of ecological and medical apartheid. My mother and father are both Black pharmacists, so I have a particular interest in medical anthropology and the way that it flows. My work formed geolinguistic praxis service by teaching in a dozen places while translating multiple texts in cultural context in over a dozen languages that I speak, read, and write. And in the process of developing GPS, I began to read about Maroons, especially in the courses I took with Sylvia Diouf in 2001. However, in Native American studies courses and reading for degrees in African studies or anthropology, I saw a great overlap where no one had been connecting dots. And moreover, I realized childhood multilingualism constitute above average abilities. So on the one hand, I had attended a private elementary school in the south side of Chicago, founded by friends of Coretta Scott King and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Emmanuel Christian School, great school in the Auburn Gresham neighborhood. And the founders, Reverend Dr. L.K. Curry and Dr. Dorothy D. Curry, never conveyed a sense that our Blackness might constitute anything other than humanness. And I did not have a white teacher until I was 11 years old and moved to the suburbs and went to public school. And when Black astronauts and Olympic gold medals and Black judges, Olympic gold medalists and Black judges came to our school to talk to us, she would let me touch her medal or her NASA spacesuit. And I never thought much about gender, race, or class and the dominant Black-white binaries of less or more. And on the other hand, I spent each summer solstice, often Juneteenth, with several hundred cousins on the Illinois Trail of Tears Highway in the Shawnee National Forest along the Ohio River. So we would explore caves where our ancestors hid in Gallatin counties and Polk counties. Interesting, I went to the Gallatin School at NYU. Albert Gallatin followed Alexander Hamilton as the Treasury Secretary, and he's got a county where my family, live in Southern Illinois. But in 1991, I remember hundreds of cousins gathered in Columbus, Ohio, where I knew as a young child that we had truly come before the Italian sailor, well before 1491. And what I knew as normative from the age of 3 or 8 or 38 will become clear to the world within the COVID-19 pandemic and the police murders of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. So returning to Yannick Marshall's assumption of Maroons, I must note, yes, we are clairvoyant. Given our indigeneity to the land coupled with ancestral knowledge and liberty, we are not alienated from our ancestors who protect us and cause us to never be foreign in any land. Whether living in Kongo-Ngola, or Chicago, my ancestors' feet touched the same patch of earth within the last 10,000 years. If we know that Maroons do not see the world in binary oppositions of black, white, male, female, east, west, queer, heteronormative, or south, north, then the people of the world must develop Maroon visions or Maroon epistemology in order to break free from the limitations of Eurocentric and Northern Hemispheric unilateral space-time. So power moves in memory and in music. When scholars operate within a black-white binary and within overarching dualisms, they rarely describe Maroons as deeply global, multilingual, and without borders. Anglophone cinema and literature describe Maroons as lonely isolates with a depressed mental state engulfed in silence. In the 1965 dissertation novel, Jubilee, poet and professor Margaret Walker dispelled the myth of Gone with the Wind with Walker's own great-grandmother as the inspiration for the central character Virey, who lives in antebellum Georgia, endures the Civil War, and settles in Reconstruction-era Alabama. With Black women at the center of American historiography, Margaret Walker's Jubilee describes Virey's second husband, Ennis Brown, as a Maroon with an incomplete concept. Margaret Walker's own step-great-grandfather, receives less clarity and depth than her biological grandfather in this novel from 1966-65. The degrees of relatedness appear to be one of the numerous reasons for the lack of development of Maroonage in this groundbreaking text that is essential to the establishment of Black studies in 1965. But when the Playboy magazine writer Alex Haley visited Margaret Walker's home in the early 1970s, Haley ate Professor Dr. Margaret Walker Alexander's gumbo and collard greens in the house she shared with her husband and 4 children on the block where Medgar and Merle Evers had lived, where Medgar Evers was murdered on that same block. Of course, Alex Haley plagiarized Jubilee to write the fiction called Roots. And the American publishing world rebranded and captured Jubilee in an effort to eliminate Black women, such as Virey Brown or Cicely Tyson's depiction of Jane Pittman, which served as dynamic historical fiction rooted in truth. Effacing Maroonage from mainstream imagination and rootedness has been essentially successful in this era of amnesia for Generation X, for millennials, for many people. The 1997 film Eve's Bayou offers a snapshot at Jim Crow era life in a Black French Louisiana marsh. Being a Maroon, one character stood out to me, despite the fact that he received the least depth with limited character and personality. The homeless, long-haired, mysterious Maroon barely spoke a word, but he knew the goings-on of Black-white people in the bayou from afar. This is a reality of Maroons. Like myself and my hundreds of cousins, we and our ancestors do sit on high atop the mountaintop, hidden in the valley, snuggled safely in caves, or hiding in broad daylight on our farms or in autonomous towns and counties. We observe with precision as we study all movements to ensure and predict our own intergenerational survival. Back on September 12th, 2001, I began an internship at Afropop Worldwide Music Productions in Brooklyn, where I cataloged the Afro-Lusophone music, Portuguese, essentially. Somehow, I juggled a full course load with teaching English learners at an elementary school in Flatbush, and on top of Afropop on Friday for their NPR broadcast. And within that strange post 9/11 space and time, I mentally merged music of the Neg Marron in Guadeloupe and Haiti with Cape Verdean mourners. The artists such as Kassav and Accident and Robert Loisson eased me towards compa beyond Wyclef Jean. President Michel Martelly, known musically as Sweet Mickey, famously sampled Cesario Vorda's Cape Verdean hit song Angola back in the 1990s, with Martelly's version entitled Pas Manien Femme, where he echoes Congo's Franco in a Lingala hit Mario. Now, I won't get into some deeper things such as the connections, colonial connections of Congo and the French Caribbean, Félix Éboué, the general governor of Congo during World War II, or Haitians living in that region in the 60s, 70s, Burkina Faso and Benin, or the literature of Maurice Condé, one of my favorite books, Last of the African Kings, of Ben Hansen, the king of Benin, in the late 1800s being exiled to Martinique. When I think of Cape Verdean artists such as Bana, Tito Parish, and Fancha, they memorialize maroonage and a longing to go home, often home to Angola. And even Brazilian samba musician Dona Vanalora, many decades ago, sang of her grandfather, a divine healer, or Nganga, from Angola. Fast forward to 2013, the Luso-Angolan musician Nelo Carvalho repatriated Kassav guitarist Jacob Desvarieux with their multilingual duet, Mama Falo, Mama said. In another video and song from 2016, Nelo Carvalho brings Guadeloupe's Tanya Sandoval to Angola for their multilingual duet, Minha Linda, My Beauty. I have spent summers in French Guadeloupe with close friends from the island, and I felt a melancholy of saudade, depending on the geolinguistic specificity of one's own colonized Portuguese accent, all longing for Africa, for Congo, Angola. Maroon's musical space fuels Haitian compa, Guadeloupean and Martinican, and of course, Angolan kizomba, which carry us home and unite us in ways that erasures of the English language cannot. Within the lyrics, one finds a clear epistemology, knowledge system or network of rootedness and origins that leave US African Americans lost in Englishness. Zimbabwean novelist Tsitsi Dangaremba writes of Englishness in her novel Nervous Conditions. One must acknowledge Englishness as psychosis. Yes, Englishness or white supremacy or Anglo-Saxon Protestantism or Eurocentric psycholinguistic worldviews constitute nervous conditions in a real Fanonian sense. And as the Martinican psychoanalyst Frantz Fanon warned us over 60 years ago, we must resurrect national culture rooted in the people of the land, which I assert calls for the power of Maroon Epistemologies. As such, we must invent a world not grounded in violent epistemologies, for if we replicate violent epistemologies with the lost illusion of liberation within the master's linguistic tools, then we will perish from hopes of becoming overseer, becoming conqueror, or exploiter of another less fortunate than oneself. The monolingual, unilinear confusion of white supremacist lexicons not only erase African humanity, but efface life, all lives. The insurrection of January 6th shows us how the suicidal nature of white supremacy and its inability to speak clearly beyond 3 letters, USA, beyond a few letters of the alphabet of the country I love, or the 5 letters of the dictator they embrace. Maroon epistemologies, by contrast to monolingual confusion of acculturation and assimilation, Maroon epistemologies produce multiplicity and diversity with rootedness for the places where we find ourselves equally free. My conclusions. Conclusions on praxis and power in these COVIDian times since 1619. In August 2020, I walked into a Black vegan bakery in Atlanta on Ralph Abernathy Boulevard. And as I returned to the location where I had eaten Friday the 13th, March, Friday the 13th, in August of 2020, I heard Beyonce's song Power. And I noted isiZulu, a language from Southern Africa. I won't sing that part, but I will sing this part. They will never take away my power, my power. They can never take away my power, my power. They feel away, oh wow, wow, wow. They feel away, oh wow. Okay, I'm not the best singer. But the lyrics in Zulu forced my ear to think in Congolese Lingala, a Niger Congo Bantu language I speak fluently. And I regret, though, my knowledge, my basic knowledge of Angolan Umbundu and Kimbundu. The predecessor of Umbundu and Kimbundu would have been spoken by my 11 times great-grandfather, King Diego Gomalon, before the Portuguese kidnapped him and his son. My 10 times great-father, John Goins, became a free man in colonial Virginia, circa 1619, while Gomalon died in Munich, Bavaria, in present-day Germany, likely fathering children with European royalty. On that same summer of 2020, just last year in Atlanta, my mind was decoding Malcolm Guthrie's linguistic map of Africa, reconfiguring Zone S of Nguni languages, to which Isindebele, isiZulu belong, very close, but still far from Zones C, Zone D, Zone H, K, M, L, R, which I know well. But Zone S brings together Nguni languages of Southern Africa, to which Zulu and Ndebele belong. As I spoke in diasporic space and time with the owners of the restaurant about the Beyonce song playing, I found myself engulfed in GPS, power knowledge, with Maroon epistemology elevating GPS with unique intensity. While revitalizing Poto, Umbundu, Kimbundu may come with time, my Native American Yesanichi Tutelo Saponi language did not die. Corey Roberts has done dynamic work in his recent MA thesis completed in the linguistics department at Arizona State University. And Roberts has done a great deal to document our ancestral Yesanichi Tutelo Saponi language, for which I am grateful. But in my doctoral thesis and dissertation years ago, I used beer advertisements and the chemistry of making beer and wine in Kongo-Ngola and Congolese Lingala translations of lyrics to access quotidian meanings and expressions as text in living contexts. In the case of Tutelo Saponi or Proto-Bundu from 1618 or Proto-Bantu from several thousand years ago, perhaps the living text in music lie mostly within diasporic Maroon communities in Haiti, Guadeloupe, Brazil, or even Jamaica. One must not forget the Garifuni or Belize or Surinamese Maroons. However, back to Africa, I'm grateful for my first Lingala instructor, Dr. Theophilo Benga, a diplomat and Egyptologist, offered a great deal of insight back in 2004 as I started PhD work, trying to make sense of these worlds and multiverses with ancestral power that produced ME and located it in GPS. Clearly, the physics of the multiverse led me to Haitian Voodoo Grand Chef Supreme, IT, and Kungon Max Gesner Beauvoir. IT Beauvoir provided clarity in 2015 which eventually allowed me to bring my mother to Kongo-Ngola in July and August of 2016, which my ancestors likely ruled before 1618. Certainly, Melungeons of the Virginia, Appalachia region dreamed of Kongo-Ngola, also known as Ndongo. I contend that the triracial or racially ambiguous Melungeons of Virginia remain quintessentially borderland Maroons. Since May 2016, I've been a member of the Melungeon Heritage Association Incorporated, which is based in Appalachia. My closer Southern Illinois family may fit into what Sylvia Ndouf classifies as hinterland Maroons, when we cross the Ohio River, returning to our Sarponi ancestral homeland closer to the Great Sauk Trail and the confluences of mighty rivers. Many, many, many rivers: Ohio, Mississippi, Missouri, Illinois, Chicago, Congo, Kasai, Kwanzaa. Quite often, the roots of Maroons appear based in Kongo-Ngola and Amerindians as blended family. Thus, if we abandon plantation politics of black-white binary oppositions and dualism, then Maroon Epistemologies allow geolinguistic praxis to serve as a conduit to accessing ancestral powers that can never be taken away from us. Should we choose to will our ancestral rights away and turn our backs on the joys of being other or non-WASP and live fully as Black, Indigenous people of color, we can unlock language that do not require whiteness to exist as the opposite of that thing. Then we can say that they will never take away our powers. With my grandma Dorsey's own grandma Strosa being the granddaughter of Marilla Goins, who was the great granddaughter of Mahil Goins, grandson of King Diego Goinlon, I can attest to the ancestral power of uterine kinship of my foremothers that has empowered ME. Never lost, never pessimistic, but always found. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Dr. Davis. That was excellent. That was a lot of new things I learned right there. Like I'm a bit mind blown right now. So we're gonna start the Q&A now. We're gonna try to make this last like around 10-15 minutes. We don't really have any questions in the chat right now, so I'm gonna try to get it started in order to try to get things going. So throughout this chat, you kind of discussed it about how pretty much this imagination of like this conception of a homeland that is far away had allowed African Americans and other African groups in the Americas basically to imagine societies outside of their own colonial ones they lived in, and how that kind of, rather than being something like pessimistic, Maroonage was kind of like this idea of thinking of alternatives, like these more progressive societies and all that stuff. So what I'm trying to think is like, how did this like impact, say, the work of, say, someone like Du Bois or all that stuff, who was more of a, like, say, who was more interested in trying to get African Americans to integrate into the political system of the United States rather than create rather than Black nationalism like Marcus Garvey, basically.
You know, the interesting thing, Marcus Garvey was a Maroon. He was a Maroon descendant in Jamaica. His ancestors fought the British and they had free land. But then W.B. Du Bois, his grandfather was Haitian. So he comes from this line of, all Haitians are Maroons, right? And here in Chicago, we're founded by mixed race Haitian Jean-Baptiste Point du Sable. So when we look at Du Bois, especially Du Bois at the end of his life, but at the beginning, before he was born, right? We think in ancestral time, where time is ancestral physics, right? As Max Beauvoir was a physicist. We have to consider Du Boisian double consciousness as dynamic, a huge breakthrough 100, 110, 100 years ago. But then also the most sociologist, Du Bois is the sociologist who's published more than any other sociologist, we also have to consider him as the son, the grandson of Maroons, of Haitian Maroons in the United States. So I feel as if the way that we capture him in greater culture might be a bit difficult. Essentially, I see Du Bois in Ghana doing what Marcus Garvey couldn't do to get to Ghana in the 1920s, 30s, before his death in 19. So I see them on the same track in ancestral space-time.
Okay, so they're not that different, actually. That's a very interesting way to think about Marcus Garvey and Du Bois and all that stuff. So we have our first question in chat. It's from Aurelia Lawrence. She wants to know who coined the term maroon. What is its meaning?
So there are many different thoughts on this. So Sylvian Diouf often says that you have to look at the Spanish word cimarron for wild or untamed. But then there's the Arabic word muharram, which means forbidden. But then I consider, because in this family line, I see Ashkenazi and Sephardim Jewish people popping up. I consider the conversos and the Gaelic Portuguese marach, which means to force, or the forced ones, who became the marons, the Maranos rather, the Maranos who were converted Muslims or Jews in Iberia and time in the 1300s, 1400s, 1500s. And we're starting looking at this time period of Christopher Columbus, Cristobal Colon. And so I would say before Spanish, because many loaner words in Spanish, Portuguese are Arabic, right? So I'm thinking of this forbidden, muharram, as this source of the word maroon. But then we now see maroon as a color, right? A reddish brown color. So yeah. Yeah,
that's interesting because of that. During the, of course, Spanish Inquisition, this is where the whole purity of blood politics started appearing in Spain and all that stuff. So, okay, and so moving on from that, we got another question from Darrell Dawson. You mentioned the excellent movie Yves Bayou. Are there other representations of Maroons in recent pop culture that come to mind? How sensitive have these portrayals been?
You know, I'm thinking more so outside of like English language context. You have a lot of, there's a movie, Neg Marron, with a French hip hop star, Stormy Bugsy. That's an interesting one. He's actually of Cape Verdean origin, but grew up, born and raised in France. He's a big hip hop performer with Congolese and other French origin hip hop stars from the 90s, 2000s. But I'm really trying to conceptualize how other, well, there is, what is it called? Fugitive modernities. My plagiarizer, a woman who plagiarizes me, named Jessica Krug, she stole out of my research. And I read her book, I read it thoroughly. She was pretending Black and Latina at George Washington University, institution I applied to about 2011. And then she stole my syllabi that I used at Malcolm X College as well. But her book, her dissertation is very poorly written and not, a lot of the sources are just off. But she's writing about Maroons inside Angola. And because of a lot of the lies and things that she did, have no, she's just a liar. Because of a lot of that, I don't really trust a lot of her work. I can see her sources and I know where she got them. And I know where she's lying about the translations of sources. And I'm reading through that. I read it some time ago when that story broke in September of 2020. But it's very troubling because the ways in which she falsifies a lot of the information about Maroons inside Angola, it replicates one of my dissertation committee members, Ugo Nwokeji, his work on the Arochukwu peoples in what became Nigeria among Igbo land folks who were building communities and engaged in war during the transatlantic slave trade and building communities in Nigeria. And so with Kisama in Angola, I read the translations or original text by German historian Beatrice Hintz, which I'm sure when Jessica Krug hacked my computer some years ago, she would have read my translation of that from German to English. So, right, she being Jessica Krug. I don't really like to mention this person. I'd forgotten that I met her at lunch in January of 2005, and she, hacked my computer a bit. And when I was in Congo for those 2 years, she found my new email address, and she said that she was going to be there in Congo and in Rwanda and Angola. And I thought, wait, this is my stalker. Is she trying to kill me? I didn't know who she was really, because she had just lied so much. Yeah, and pretty much everything she published on Amadou Diallo to Angola, Congo, it's stuff she stole from me. But otherwise, there aren't a great deal of writings about Maroons, especially as I'm realizing within being a part of the Melungeon Heritage Association, the Melungeons think of themselves as triracial isolates who could be gypsies, who could be anything. And they don't know that we do now. I've told them that Melange Angola is actually the source and origin of the term. And there were many different understandings of what that could have meant other than Melungeon. So part of the issue, I would say, is that in the English language, there's very little to conceptualize. Also, we have to look at how Maroons, how African music and drumming were outlawed in the United States, what became the United States, except for Louisiana. So you have this outlawing of a way of transmitting knowledge through drumming, through music, and even through words. So that forgetfulness into the English language really effaces Maroon Epistemologies.
Okay. All right. So we don't really have any more questions in the chat, and we've hit our time limit. If anyone wants to ask one more question, feel free to unmute your mic and just ask it out loud, and we'll wrap things up. Actually, we have one more in the chat. Is there any notable Maroon influences in linguistics spoken in English today in the United States?
There are a lot of Africanisms in certain terminology, especially in Kikongo words, gombo. In Lingala, we call it Ndongo Dongo is okra, but we call it Ngombo in Kikongo. And then you need okra for your gumbo in Louisiana, or guba being a peanut in Kikongo. There's certain loner words that kind of stick around. I'm really curious in where the Congo sort of Umbundu, Potobundu, or some of these languages would have been spoken blending with Siouan Algonquin languages. I'm trying to see that sort of interface, which would have definitely been the case circa 1700. So I would like to kind of piece together the Amerindian, Maroon, Kikongo, Ngola, loner words blending in with Siouan Algonquin, and especially within the lexicons, how these sort of mathematical linguistic paradigms kind of blend, and how I can see this in Haitian Creole. You can see the flow of Kikongo and Niger Congo Bantu languages into Haitian Creole, especially in the structure of even some pronouns still being the same, but in the structure of the formation of future and of the past tense within glunative lexicon, sort of glunative verb. You might understand within Nguni languages, Bantu languages, how you have your verb, but then you can add pieces within, make the verb a little bit different. Far more complex than in English, just put ed, ing. That's too simple. But in just about every other language, there are more complexities. And we see those complexities mirrored in Haitian Creole, mirrored in Lingala, in Kikongo, Timbundu, Umbundu, etc. Zulu.
All right. Okay, so we've ran out of time. Thank you for everyone who showed up today to watch Dr. Davis's presentation. We've learned a lot. This is quite a lot to process, and one of the things I learned is I wish I learned a little bit more about linguistics in college and all that stuff. That would have helped a lot in understanding a lot of history that I've been studying and all that stuff. So
yeah, thank you, Dr. Davis, so much. You guys can hear me okay? Hear me okay? I've done a little traveling, but thank you, Dr. Davis. I really appreciate the time you spent with us today. And everyone, again, thank you for coming and joining us in community. If you do have additional questions, feel free to reach out to us. And Dr. Davis, I will be sending a follow-up email here shortly with some information. But before we go, I do just want to do a quick shout out for a couple of upcoming programs we have. So in February, on Thursday, the 11th at 3 p.m. Central Time, our board member, Dr. Karen Richmond, will be doing a lecture on Haitian voodoo spiritualities. On Friday, February 19th at 6 p.m. Central Time, Dr. Courtney Joseph will be doing a lecture on the power of oral history, something that we're really excited for. And then lastly, on Sunday, February 21st at 2 p.m. Central Time, Dr. Cranston Knight will be doing a lecture on the Rwandan genocide. So some really great things coming up for February and the rest of 2021. Dr. Davis, I am so grateful that you were here to share your experiences and your stories. Thank you for starting off 2021 strong with this Scholar Lecture Series. Again, everyone, have a fabulous rest of your day, rest of your weekend. And we hope to hear you and see you at HAMOC and virtual in-person programs soon. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you very much.